Okay, Alexander, let's discuss Biden's comments with regards to Taiwan. Biden is on an Asia trip. He's accompanied by Jake Sullivan, and both of them actually have made some pretty strong statements against China and in favor of recognition. It seems in favor of some sort of recognition for Taiwan. I mean, that's the only way I can place it. But Biden said that the U.S. is ready to go to war with China. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but that's pretty much what he said. This is crazy, but there you have it. It also signals a bit of a narrative shift. I think that the U.S. media, and the UK media is trying to provide a new crisis in order to give the Biden White House an off ramp from Russia-Ukraine, because they see the writing on the wall with regard to what's happening in Ukraine. That's something we'll discuss in a different program. But this China thing is crazy, but it also serves a media optics purpose as well.
Yeah, I completely agree, because that's exactly what it does. I mean, what is happening is this. Biden meets Xi Jinping. They've had various virtual meetings. He gives all kinds of assurances. He tells Xi Jinping nothing has changed. We still recognize, we still stick to the one China policy. Our policy is exactly as it always was. We haven't shifted on anything. And then, of course, he makes public statements like the ones he's just made about defending the US military. He's just committed the US military to defending Taiwan. His State Department does the opposite. We did a program a short while ago about how the State Department changed its website to edge towards what looks like recognition of Taiwan. He does also, Xi Jinping said to him directly, you tell me one thing, and then as soon as you go away, the opposite happens. It was the closest, as I said, any world leader has come that I know of to telling the President of the United States, you are a liar. Now, of course, this is Joe Biden. People are all going around saying, well, it's just Sleepy Joe. He doesn't know what he's saying. It's all written for him. Jake Sullivan is there. He's passing the cue cards. The president just says what comes into his head. And, we all know that may not be quite as sharp as it once might have been. But the fact is, this is now an accumulating trend. Whenever Biden slips, it's always in the direction of confrontation. Like when he said, when he was in Warsaw, when he was in Poland, that the objective was regime change in Moscow, the overthrow of Putin, which of course we all know that was what US policy really is all about. And it seems to me, made again the same kind of slip over Taiwan, in the sense that even if he's not directly, even if the United States isn't in fact going to go directly to war to defend Taiwan, I think that would be extremely dangerous, very, very serious. I think there'd be a lot of opposition in the US to doing anything like that. But even if that's not the actual stated policy, making these very belligerent statements is consistent with everything else that the United States, this administration, is actually doing. We have, and this is, I take this from Garland Nixon. He said it to me in an email. This is a very, very dangerous administration. If they really want to start World War III, then they're going about it the right way. They've come very close. They've come dangerously close to this in Ukraine. And now that, as you rightly said, Ukraine is turning sour on them, we're starting on something in Taiwan with China. And certainly people in the administration seems to be wanting this. But as you correctly said, this is also a wonderful distraction. Things are not going well in Ukraine, so now let's focus on China instead. No reverse gear. No attempt to rethink things, no attempt to reopen talks or negotiations with either the Chinese or the Russians, no attempt to achieve a real de-escalation. On the contrary, confrontation all the time, confrontation with the Russians in Ukraine, confrontations with China over Taiwan. If the one starts to go wrong, you start emphasizing the other.
Yeah, but I agree with you that a lot of people are going to say, "Oh, that's just Joe Bidenopolis," as he called himself last week. But Jake Sullivan echoed those points as well. Doesn't that trouble you? The fact that it
Yeah.
wasn't only Joe Biden, but also Jake Sullivan, who's not, in the mental state
No.
that Biden is in.
No, it does worry me because, of course, Sullivan is the president's national security advisor. I mean, he is the president's major advisor on foreign and security policy. And not just Jake Sullivan. You look at all the foreign policy team that Biden has. They're all hardliners. They're all neocons. Blinken, Victoria Nuland, all of them are. None of them are people who look for compromises. So this is completely consistent with what you would expect coming from Jake Sullivan. As I said, I think what Biden did, it was a slip in the sense that but it might have been intended. I'm not sure. In a way, the fact that we all say to each other that, it's Biden blundering around, it makes it easier for people like Sullivan to insert these things because you can make these comments, you can appear to commit the US military in that kind of way, but then of course you can go on pretending to your own media, pretending to the American people, and perhaps most importantly, pretending to the Chinese. Well, that was never intended. That was just the president. You know what he's like. He comes up with these kind of things. Whereas in fact, the president is telling us what the administration's policy actually is. One way or the other, all this is extremely dangerous. The Chinese are already reacting very, very negatively to this. It increases the probability of a military confrontation over Taiwan. It doesn't reduce it because the Chinese see this as a challenge and a challenge which they have to face. So it's incredibly dangerous, irrespective of what its origins were. But I'm quite sure myself that even if this was not entirely a slip, it's a slip that tells us what the actual policy is. And as you rightly said, Jake Sullivan, who doesn't have the president's issues, essentially repeated it. And why disbelieve him?
Okay. How do I say the U.S. NATO, the U.S. NATO, they're getting hammered in Ukraine. I think I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but every day a new village is being gobbled up by the Russian military, and the writing's on the wall. I think it's starting to crystallize what's happening. And even Zelensky came out during a speech and he said that Ukraine is losing 100 men a day. He actually said it. If I'm not mistaken, that is true. He did say that. But for him to say that, that number is probably 4 or 5, 6 times more. We know he's going to undercount dramatically. Anyway, what's my point in this? The U.S. and NATO, they understand that this Ukraine thing is just not working out. Do you think they actually believe that they can take on China and maybe get a foreign policy win there? And is the game plan also to try and poke the dragon, to try and push a NATO Pacific, like a franchising of NATO, a subsidiary of NATO, very much like Liz Truss talked about like 3 weeks ago. She actually mentioned it, a NATO Pacific. We have the AUKUS as well. We had the Quad. I don't know if that's still going, but you have kind of the beginnings of some sort of U.S.-led alliance in the Pacific to check on to keep China in check. So, is that what this is all about? Could it be, Ukraine? We lost it. Let the Poles handle it now. Just dump it on them, dump it on Poland, the EU. Let's try to get a win in China. Do they think they can win militarily in China?
Yeah, I think.
And is a benefit. One of the benefits to doing all of this, a NATO Pacific?
Yeah, I think they do think they can win. That's the trouble. I think this has been the problem all along. I think they thought they could win Ukraine. As I said, that isn't turning out quite as they expected. So, but they don't learn lessons from that. They say to themselves, "Well, look, Ukraine hasn't turned out quite as we thought. We've still got the need to break up this Russian-Chinese strategic partnership because that's the big challenge. So, if we can't hit and weaken the Russians." Well, we know that they're tough nut, so let's go after the Chinese. The Chinese are, much weaker. Their navy isn't yet remotely up to the level of ours. We have overwhelming superiority. At least that's what they think. They also think Taiwan is going to be able to put up a big resistance, and if all else fails, well, we can create this new Pacific NATO. We can cobble together, we can get the Indians on side, we can get the Southeast Asian states, ASEAN. The ASEAN states showed no interest or desire, by the way. There was a meeting with them recently in Washington. They refused to criticize Russia. I'd be very surprised if they'd shifted position on China. But anyway, we're going to try and get them all on side, create the Pacific NATO, and of course, escalate the sanctions war against China. Because just as we believe that Russia is a one-dimensional oil-based economy that will tumble, which will collapse at the first kick, and it hasn't quite turned out like that, but that's what we were saying. So we believe that China is this great big export machine. If its exports are cut off, and if we blockade the Straits of Malacca, then the Chinese economy will also implode. And I think that that is how these people think. I think that they are obsessed with preserving the globalist project that they are all very committed to in their various forms. If they're neocons, they believe in, the American mission, which is one of, by the way, which they themselves want to steer the United States towards. They believe in all of these things, and if they failed in Ukraine, well, that they're not going to give up. They're going to try somewhere else, and I'm afraid the risks that they will try something with China are now becoming increasing, and becoming greater every day. Now, the Chinese are wise to this. I've no doubt there have been behind the scenes consultations between the Chinese and the Russians. We've been hearing reports that the Chinese are ramping up purchases of Russian oil to replenish their strategic reserves, which suggests that the Chinese are worried about an oil blockade, the Straits of Malacca situation that I was speaking about. It's also known that the Chinese had a discussion recently with all their banks. All the chiefs of their major banks were brought to Beijing, and there was a discussion there with them about how to prepare for a sanctions war, with the same kind of action that was taken against the Russian central bank being taken against them. So the Chinese are busy making their preparations because they can see what's coming. Just as Russia could not retreat over Ukraine, China can't back down over Taiwan. The neocons sense this, and that's why they are using this as a tool to create a confrontation.
Yeah, that's all well and good, but what preparations is the U.S. and the European Union doing with regards to this incoming crisis, this incoming conflict?
Oh, we don't do preparations. I mean, preparations are not something we bother with. I mean, we come up with all sorts of plans and schemes, but we don't actually sit down and work it out, because, of course, if we did that, well, that might actually tell us that we shouldn't be doing the things we want to do, and we don't want to let mere facts get in the way of our plans and our intentions and our objectives. So they're not preparing anything. And I'm absolutely sure, in fact, that there must be people in the US Fed, the Federal Reserve Board, the Pentagon, the Commerce Department, who must be increasingly worried about the kind of things these people are up to. The neocons are very strong in the State Department. They're very strong in the National Security Council. They have a powerful footprint in the CIA, and they basically have a lock on the US Treasury. But of course, there are many other agencies in the US government which are not, I think, signed up to all of this. And I'm sure that there's growing worry amongst all of those people in these other departments. But of course, they're not being consulted. They're not being spoken to. You see, let's go back to Ukraine. Let's go back to those sanctions that were imposed over Ukraine. The Federal Reserve Board wasn't consulted about the actions against the Russian Central Bank, and it wasn't consulted about the decision to disconnect Russian banks from SWIFT, because the neocons knew that if it was consulted, it would have opposed doing those things. So if you know that the Federal Reserve Board is going to oppose you doing things that you are determined to do, you don't consult the US Federal Reserve Board. And the result is that you can't prepare and plan. Because how can you prepare and plan if the US Federal Reserve Board is not part of the loop of your discussions? That's the problem with the way the Fed works, with the way the neocons work. They have these plans, they have these schemes, but because they operate in a conspiratorial way, which they do, they can't ever be prepared properly or thoroughly.
What a disaster. What a freaking disaster this is going to be if this happens. Anyway.
Oh, it's.
Oh boy.
It'll keep us very busy at the Duran. Let's put it like that. Disaster just doesn't approach it. A war in Europe, in Ukraine, and a war in the Pacific. There are no words big enough to describe what a cataclysmic situation we will be in.
The Duran.locals.com and the Duran shop. Use the code GOODDAY. Get 10% off all merch. Take care.